They say that on the night Hoylun gave birth, a storm broke across the steppe. The wind tore through the tents, horses screamed, and lightning crawled over the mountains like veins of fire. In the heart of that storm, a child entered the world. Small, silent, his skin the color of ash and dawn. When Hoylun lifted him to the light of the fire, the elders gasped. In his tiny fist, the newborn clenched a clot of dark blood. Among the Mongols, this was no coincidence. It was a mark of the heavens, a sign that the child would hold the lives of many in his hands. A conqueror, born not from peace, but from the storm itself. Hoylun named him Temujin, after a warrior her husband had once captured and slain. No one asked why. Names on the steppe were prophecies disguised as memories. Perhaps she chose the name to honor her husband's victory, or perhaps to remind her son that life itself was taken, not given. Temujin grew among the smell of horses and smoke, the endless whisper of the wind through grass. His cradle was a saddle, his lullaby, the sound of hoofbeats. Before he could walk, he was placed on horseback. Before he could speak, he learned to listen, to storms, to silence, to fear. The world around him was not kind. Tribes rose and fell like waves. One winter, a feast. The next, famine. Alliances lasted only as long as hunger allowed. Every man trusted his sword more than his word. But even as a child, Temujin watched differently. While others saw sky and grass, he saw patterns. The way herds moved before rain, the way men's voices changed before betrayal. He said little, but his silence carried weight, like the calm before a storm. The old women whispered that the boy was touched by Tengri, the eternal blue sky, not favored, but chosen. And being chosen in the steppe was not a gift. It was a burden no one else could bear. Among the tribes of the steppe, one name began to flicker like a spark in dry grass: the Borjigin. They were not the largest nor the richest, but they carried a kind of silence that others mistook for weakness. Their leader was Yesuge, a man whose strength came not from his words, but from the weight of his gaze. He was known for riding farther, fighting longer, and surviving where others fell. Yesuge ruled no empire, only respect, and even that was a fragile thing. Power on the steppe was borrowed, not owned. It lasted only as long as a man could hold a bowstring steady. He built alliances the way a craftsman builds arrows, carefully, one reed at a time. And like every man born beneath the eternal blue sky, he wanted more. His tent was filled with stories of war, raids against Tatars, hunts through blizzards, nights when horses froze standing upright. The men who rode with him said he never turned his back on a fight, never slept beneath the same stars twice. He believed that a man's worth was measured by the distance between his fear and his next victory. But fate, on the steppe, always rode with a second horse, one that carried consequences. During a raid deep into the land of the Merkits, Yesuge saw a woman traveling with her new husband. Her name was Hoylun, proud, bright-eyed, with a calm that unnerved even warriors. He watched her from afar and felt the wind shift. That night, he struck. The ambush was swift. Screams echoed through the hills. Hoylun's husband fell, and she was taken, torn from her life, carried across the plain by the man who decided that desire was reason enough. Abduction was no crime on the steppe. To take a wife by force was as old as the tribes themselves. But Hoylun was no silent captive. She did not curse or weep. She watched. She learned the path home, and in time she learned the man who had stolen her would become the father of her children. From that act of violence came a family, and from that family, a destiny that would swallow nations. Before the world had borders, there was the steppe, a sea of grass stretching farther than any eye could see, alive, restless, endless. It moved and breathed with the wind, whispering through the wild herds that thundered across it like living storms. No walls, no roads, no kings, only horizon and sky. To the people who wandered here, the earth was a living creature and the sky was its soul. Every sunrise was a promise, every storm a warning. The steppe did not forgive weakness, but it respected endurance. They lived on horseback. Children learned to ride before they could walk. Men hunted with bows curved like the moon. Women guarded the camps, tanned hides, brewed fermented milk that burned the throat but kept the heart warm. Fire was sacred, so was hospitality. To kill a guest was to curse your own bloodline. Life was harsh, yet strangely pure. They owned nothing they could not carry. No gold, no palaces, only their courage and the wind at their backs. The Mongols called themselves the people of the felt tents. When storms tore those tents apart, they built them again. When hunger came, they followed the herds. When enemies attacked, they vanished into the grass, only to return with vengeance in the night. But even here, among those who seemed born from dust and thunder, ambition stirred. The steppe had many tribes: Naimans, Merkits, Tatars, Karaites, each proud, each unwilling to bow. They fought not for wealth, but for survival, for horses, for water, for a sliver of safety in a land that offered none. And yet, from this chaos, something unimaginable was preparing to rise, a single will strong enough to unite them all. A storm inside a man's heart that would one day change the shape of the world. Before the world had borders, there was the steppe, an ocean of grass that never ended, stretching from horizon to horizon, restless beneath the wind. It was alive, breathing, whispering through herds of wild horses that thundered across it like living storms. Here there were no walls, no kings, no maps, only sky, and the people who followed it. The earth beneath them was a living creature, and the sky was its soul. The Mongols called it the eternal blue, vast, patient, and merciless. Every sunrise was a promise, every storm a warning. The steppe forgave nothing but respected endurance. They lived on horseback. Children learned to ride before they could walk. Men hunted wolves and deer with bows curved like the moon. Women tended fires, tanned hides, brewed the white drink, fermented mare's milk that burned the throat but warmed the heart. Fire was sacred, and so was hospitality. To kill a guest was to curse your own bloodline. Life was harsh, yet pure. They owned nothing they could not carry. No gold, no palaces, no walls. Only courage and the wind at their backs. When storms tore their tents apart, they built them again. When hunger came, they followed the herds. When enemies struck, they vanished into the grass, only to return in the dark. The steppe was not empty. Dozens of tribes roamed its valleys and rivers: Naimans, Merkits, Tatars, Karaites, each proud, each unwilling to bow. They fought not for land, but for survival, for water, for horses, for breath. For centuries they had lived and died this way, a storm that never settled. Yet from that storm, something unimaginable was preparing to rise, a single will strong enough to unite them all. Among the tribes was one name, quiet but persistent: the Borjigin. Their leader was Yesugei, a man born from dust and violence. He rode farther than any of his men, spoke little, and carried more silence than anger. Power on the steppe was borrowed, never owned, and he understood that truth better than anyone. He built alliances the way a craftsman builds arrows, carefully, knowing each one could splinter. His life was measured in raids, scars, and horses that outlived their riders. But in the steppe, every ambition rides with its shadow. During a raid against the Merkits, Yesuge saw a woman traveling with her new husband. Her name was Hölun. Proud, bright-eyed, unafraid, he watched her once and felt the wind shift. That night, he attacked. The ambush was quick. Hölun was taken, her husband slain. She was carried across the plain by the man who had decided that desire was enough reason. Abduction was no crime among the Mongols. To take a wife by force was as old as the tribes themselves. But Hölun was not a silent captive. She did not scream. She did not curse. She watched. She learned. And when she spoke, her voice cut through even the wind. In time, she became not just his wife, but his equal, sharper, colder, wiser. From that act of violence came a family, and from that family, a destiny that would swallow kingdoms. They built a camp near the Onon River, yurts of white felt, smoke rising like thin lines into the sky. In winter, the wolves howled close. In spring, the grass turned the color of fire. Hölun gave birth to her first son as a storm swept through the valley. Lightning split the sky, horses screamed, and men hid their faces. When the storm ended, she lifted her child to the light of the fire. He was small, silent, and in his fist he held a clot of blood. The elders whispered that such a child would hold the lives of many in his hands, a conqueror, born not from peace, but from thunder. Hölun named him Temujin, after a warrior her husband had once captured and slain. The name carried both death and memory, as if fate had already begun to write. Temujin's cradle was a saddle, his lullaby, the sound of hooves and the low hum of wind through grass. He grew among smoke and horses, watching, listening. Even as a child, he was different. Where others saw sky and plain, he saw patterns. The way the herds moved before rain, the way men's voices changed before betrayal. The old women said the boy was touched by Tengri, the eternal blue sky, not favored, but chosen. And being chosen was no blessing. It was a burden that only one man could carry. Yesuge loved his son, but lived as the steppe demanded, by conquest. On a journey home, he met a group of Tatars, enemies of his people. But the law of hospitality was sacred. They shared milk and fire. They smiled. They offered him a bowl of fermented drink. Yesuge raised it in peace. By sunset, poison was already in his blood. He rode for home, but never arrived. His strength failed by the river. He fell from his horse, and the wind carried his last breath away. The men who found him buried him in silence and rode on, too afraid to linger. When news reached the camp, Hölun did not cry. She stood among the children, the tent walls flapping in the wind, and simply said, "The sky has taken its share." The death of Yesuge shattered more than a family. It ended what little order he had built. The allies who had once sworn loyalty disappeared overnight. The warriors took their herds, their weapons, and left the widow to die in the grasslands. That night, as the campfire burned low, Temujin stood beside his mother. The smoke stung his eyes, but he did not look away. He was 9 years old. Somewhere beyond the darkness, wolves began to howl. Hölun rested her hand on his shoulder and said quietly, "The world has turned its back on us, so we will face it alone." From that moment, his childhood ended. The wind moved through the plain like a whisper from the future. The boy who had clenched blood in his fist at birth would soon learn what it meant to bleed for real. After Yesugei's death, the steppe turned its face away from his family. The warriors who had once shared his fire took their horses and their oaths and vanished into the endless grass. The Borjigin name became a whisper that no one wanted to speak aloud. In the laws of the plains, a family without a father was no longer a clan. It was prey. Hulun gathered what little was left: a few sheep, 2 half-starved horses, a broken cart. She tied strips of felt into ropes, lashed the frame of a yurt together with her own hands, and told her children that they would not die here. When the first snow came, she cut her hair short so it would not freeze against her neck. The winter wind carried no mercy. The rivers locked in ice before the herds could move south. Food became memory. At night, the children clung to their mother, listening to the wolves circle outside the tent. Temujin was small, but he did not cry. He stared through the flap of felt into the dark, waiting for the eyes of the wolves to appear. When spring returned, hunger changed its shape. It was no longer fear, it was a rhythm. They woke, searched for roots and berries, trapped marmots, fished with hooks made from bone. The Mongols considered such work shameful, the act of the desperate, but shame could not fill an empty stomach. Hulun worked until her hands bled, whispering the same words every night. The sky has not forgotten us. Temujin learned quickly. He watched how the wind bent the grass before a storm, how birds vanished when predators were near. He began to sense the language of the land, the quiet that came before danger, the pulse of hooves far beyond sight. The steppe became his teacher, silence became his ally. But survival demanded more than patience. Among the children was Bekter, Temujin's half-brother, older, stronger, crueler. He hoarded food, mocked the younger ones, and reminded everyone that the eldest son was master when the father was gone. Temujin watched him the way a hawk watches the plain, still waiting for a mistake. One hot afternoon, when the air shimmered above the grass, Bekter went to check the snares along the river. Temujin followed with his younger brother Kasar. They walked without words. The sound of insects filled the air, and somewhere far off, thunder murmured. When Bekter turned, it was already too late. Temujin drew his bow and released. The arrow struck clean. Bekter fell to his knees, surprise still in his eyes. There was no victory in the act, only silence. The steppe seemed to hold its breath. The brother stood over the body, waiting for something. Punishment, forgiveness, a sign. None came. Among the Mongols, to kill one's kin was the darkest of sins, but there were no elders left to judge, no tribe to condemn. Only the grass, the sky, and the faint sound of water. When they returned, Hulun looked at her sons and said nothing. The law of the world had already punished them. From that day on, they would be alone. Temujin carried the weight quietly. He spoke less, moved with purpose, hunted farther than before. The others began to follow his lead without knowing why. Even then, something in him commanded obedience, not through anger, but through certainty. Seasons passed. The family lived like ghosts, unseen and unclaimed. Raiders crossed their land more than once, taking what little they had. Hulun hid the children in river reeds while she faced the intruders alone, offering milk and silence instead of defiance. When they left, Temujin asked why she had not fought. She told him, "Sometimes to live is to wait." He remembered that sentence for the rest of his life. One night, he rode beyond the camp to set traps and did not return by dawn. When Hoyland found him, he was bound to a horse post, captured by a rival clan that had discovered who he was. The orphaned son of Yesugei, heir to nothing but a name. They placed a wooden collar around his neck, 2 beams of oak clamped tight, a yoke heavier than his body. It forced his head down so he could not see the sky. They led him through the camp to mockery and laughter. Children threw stones, women spat. The men called him the broken son, the fallen prince. He was made to serve his captors, carrying water, chopping wood, kneeling in mud. The weight of the collar tore at his shoulders until the skin split. At night, he lay tied to a post, listening to the camp breathe around him. He stopped feeling hunger. Pain became his only companion. Yet beneath the exhaustion, something inside refused to break. He watched how the guards moved, how they obeyed their chief without question, how fear shaped every gesture. He began to understand that fear was stronger than the sword, and that whoever controlled it could rule even free men. Days turned into weeks. He stopped counting. His neck hardened. His eyes stayed sharp. One evening, a storm rose suddenly, tearing through the camp. The guards drank to keep warm, their laughter swallowed by thunder. Temujin waited until their singing blurred into silence. He pressed his shoulder against the wooden collar, twisted once, twice. The oak cracked. Splinters cut his skin, but he did not stop. The third twist broke the beam clean. He slipped free, crawled toward the river, and waded into the freezing water. The current pulled him under. Reeds tore at his arms. He sank into the mud, holding his breath as torchlight swept across the surface. Riders searched the banks, shouting his name as if to curse it. None saw him. At dawn, a man found him, a herdsman from another tribe. The stranger saw the collar still hanging from the boy's neck, saw the blood and the eyes that refused to lower. He said nothing. Instead, he broke the remaining wood with his knife and handed him a horse. "Not all chains are made of iron," he said. Temujin nodded, mounted, and rode into the mist. Behind him, the camp burned its own fires and returned to sleep. Ahead of him stretched the same endless plain, silent, cold, and waiting. The boy rode without looking back. The steppe had taken everything, but it had given him one thing in return: purpose. He rode until the sun rose high and the air grew warm again. For the first time since his father's death, he lifted his head fully to the sky. It was blue and merciless, just as it had always been, but now it belonged to him. The grass had turned green again by the time Temujin found his way back to the Onon River. The journey had stripped him of everything: fear, pity, hesitation. He was no longer a boy. He rode like someone who had already died once and decided that it would not happen again. The family he had left was still alive, but barely. Hoyland greeted him without a word. She saw the scars around his neck, the quiet in his eyes, and knew what kind of man had returned. She did not ask where he had been. The steppe teaches that what is endured need not be spoken. Among the tribes nearby was a girl Temujin had been promised to as a child, Borte, daughter of the Ongirat clan. Years before, when both were small, their fathers had made a pact to bind the families. Most thought the agreement forgotten. But Temujin rode to the Ongirat camp anyway. He came with nothing, no herds, no warriors, only a single horse and his will. When he entered the camp, the guards laughed. Borta's father studied him with suspicion, her mother with curiosity. The boy they remembered had vanished. In his place stood a man who looked as if the wind itself obeyed him. They gave him shelter for a night. At dawn, Berta came to him. Her voice was calm, steady, as though she had been waiting all those years for him to return. They spoke little. Silence said enough. When he left, she gave him a gift, a coat made of black sable, the most valuable thing her family owned. Temujin accepted it not as wealth, but as a symbol, proof that someone still believed in him. He rode south to the lands of Togril, Khan of the Karaites, his father's old ally. Before the great Khan's tent, Temujin laid the sable coat at his feet. "It is all I own," he said. "If you accept it, you accept me as your son." Togril studied him for a long time. The young man's clothes were torn, his face lined by wind and dust, but his voice did not shake. Finally, the Khan nodded. "Then rise, my son," he said. "We will ride together." Temujin left that camp with an ally and a promise. But far to the north, an old wound was reopening. The Merkits, the same tribe from whom Yesuge had once stolen Hurlun, had not forgotten. Vengeance in the steppe sleeps lightly. They learned that the son of the thief had returned and that he now had a wife. To them, that was justice unfulfilled. It began one night, without warning. The moon was high, the wind still. Temujin's small camp lay quiet beside the river. Then came the sound, distant thunder that grew and split the air. Horses, hundreds of them. The Merkits fell upon the camp like a flood. Flames tore through the tents, arrows hissed through the dark. Temujin shouted for Berta, but the air was full of screams and smoke. He saw her once, silhouetted against the firelight, before riders swept her away into the night. When morning came, nothing remained but ashes and hoof prints. Temujin stood among the ruins, his hands black with soot. He did not weep. Grief was a luxury for men who still had choices. He swore an oath before the dead and the living. He would find her or die in the search. He rode to Togril and told him what had happened. The old Khan listened without interrupting. When Temujin finished, Togril said, "Then it is time the steppe remembers fear." Messengers rode out in every direction. The Karaites gathered their warriors. Old men polished their swords. The call spread across the grasslands like wind through fire. Among those who came was Jamukha, Temujin's blood brother, once a friend, now a memory. They met under a pale dawn, embraced, and swore the oath of brothers again. Under one sky, two souls. Together, they raised an army unlike any the steppe had seen. Wild men tempered by discipline, chaos molded into form. By the time the sun rose, 10,000 horses moved as one. They found the Merkit camp hidden deep along a bend in the Seleng River. Smoke rose from the morning fires. The air smelled of meat and wet earth. Temujin's men waited in the fog until he raised his hand. The world seemed to stop breathing. Then the horn sounded. The riders descended like a storm. The Merkits scattered, shouts turning to screams. Arrows darkened the sky. The Karaites cut through the center. Jamukha's troops circled from the west, closing the trap. The battle lasted less than an hour. When it was over, the river ran thick with mud and blood. Temujin dismounted, his hands trembling. He walked through the wreckage of tents, stepping over the bodies of men who had never known his name. His eyes searched for one thing only. In the far corner of the camp, inside a half-burned yurt, he found Berta. She was alive, but her silence told the rest. She did not cry when she saw him. She simply placed her hand against his chest as if to make sure he was real. They returned to the Onan together. Weeks later, she gave birth to a son. No one knew whose child it was. Among the Mongols, such uncertainty was poison. But Temujin stood before his campfire, lifted the newborn high, and said, "His name is Jochi. He is my son." The word spread like wildfire. Some called it mercy, others called it strategy. But no one dared question him. He had turned shame into strength, rumor into rule. The tribes began to notice. For the first time, they saw in Temujin something the steppe had never offered before: order. He punished betrayal, rewarded loyalty, and divided spoils not by blood, but by merit. Jamuka laughed at this. He told his men that Temujin was trying to turn warriors into servants, free men into soldiers. Yet, even as he mocked him, his followers began to leave, crossing the grass to join Temujin's camp, drawn by the strange comfort of predictability. The steppe was beginning to change its rhythm. Temujin still had few horses, fewer men, but he had something far rarer: a system. He could see what others could not: a future where unity meant survival, and survival meant power. At night, he and Berta sat by the fire. The wind pushed against the yurt walls, whispering through the cracks. She asked him, "When will it end?" He stared into the flames. "When the steppe speaks with one voice," he said. Outside, the horses stamped and snorted, restless in the dark. The sky above them was wide and silent, holding secrets that neither of them could yet imagine. The alliance between Temujin and Jamuka did not last. At first, their camps moved side by side across the grasslands, two brothers beneath one sky, their riders sharing food, stories, and victories. But even in peace, power casts a shadow. Jamuka was born into privilege. His family name carried old authority, and he ruled by charm and cruelty in equal measure. His tent was full of singers, his nights of wine. He was a man who loved to be followed, and he measured his worth by the number of men who rode behind him. Temujin, by contrast, ruled through silence. His camp was strict, organized, precise. He forbade theft, punished betrayal without hesitation, and rewarded those who worked hardest, even if they were of low birth. Under him, the tribes began to feel something new: safety. At first, Jamuka laughed at his friend's discipline. Then he began to notice his own riders slipping away in the night, taking their horses and loyalty to Temujin. The laughter stopped. Around the fires, men began to whisper two different visions of the future: Jamuka's, where the steppe stayed wild and free, and Temujin's, where chaos bowed before order. It was not long before the grass between them caught fire. Jamuka called a council of the old Khans and declared himself the one true ruler of the Mongols. His words were met with cheers and drums. Temujin was not invited. He heard the news from a wandering trader, smiled and said only, "Then the sky will choose." The choice came swiftly. Jamuka's army was vast, 10,000 riders under banners painted with fire and smoke. Temujin's men numbered less than half that, but they moved as if driven by one heartbeat. Their camp had no music, no feasts, only the sound of sharpening blades and horses breathing in the cold. They met near the 70 Marshes, a valley thick with fog and reeds. At dawn, the sky turned pale, and the ground shook beneath the first charge. Arrows hissed like rain, spears broke, the air filled with dust and screams. Temujin's warriors held their lines, silent, disciplined, waiting for his signal. Jamuka's men were wilder. They charged with fury, shouting his name, crashing against the organized wall before them. For hours, the battle swayed like the grass itself, first one way, then the other. Temujin's discipline began to crack, his flanks folded, his center faltered. When the sun began to sink, Jamuka's numbers finally overwhelmed them. The plain fell silent except for the crows. Temujin's army was broken. Jamuka walked among the prisoners, his cloak stained with blood, his smile thin. He ordered that those who had betrayed him to join Temujin be punished in a way no steppe warrior had seen before. 50 men were boiled alive in iron cauldrons. The smell carried for miles. Even Jamuka's own men looked away. There is strength in victory, but there is also shame, and cruelty leaves a shadow longer than defeat. Temujin escaped that night with a handful of riders. The marsh swallowed them. The fog hid their tracks. Behind them, Jamuka's camp burned its fires high, celebrating what it believed was the end of a rival. For 10 years, the chronicles fall silent. No one knows exactly where Temujin went. Some say he wandered the Gobi Desert alone, living on water and roots. Others say he served under distant lords in the west, learning the ways of settled kingdoms, how they governed, how they built walls strong enough to keep the chaos out. But wherever he went, he was not idle. He studied, he remembered, he waited. He learned that leadership was not granted by birth, but built through trust, through the law, through fear used wisely. He learned that victory bought with cruelty soon turns to dust, but order born from purpose could last beyond death. When he returned to the steppe, he was no longer the boy who had ridden into slavery or the man who had fought for one woman. He was something else entirely, calm, deliberate, unshakable. His enemies called him a ghost. His followers called him hope. The old Khans barely noticed his return at first. He had few men, fewer horses. But wherever he went, tribes began to follow. He did not demand loyalty. He offered it, and then required it in return. He brought back the lost art of trust to a world that had forgotten what it meant. He rebuilt his army from nothing. He divided his warriors into tens, hundreds, thousands. Every man knew his place. Every man was responsible for the others. It was the same idea that had once made him survive the collar and the yoke. Strength through structure. He punished theft harshly, but rewarded courage twice as much. When disputes arose, he judged them himself, listening to both sides before deciding. His fairness shocked the steppe more than his victories ever would. Soon word began to spread again. The same men who had once hunted him now rode to his camp to swear allegiance. Jamuka's name, once bright as fire, began to dim in the wind. One evening, Temujin sat alone by the river where his father had died. The water was cold, clear, endless. He dropped a pebble into it and watched the ripples spread. He said quietly, "The steppe has never known peace. Maybe it is time it learns." He rose, mounted his horse, and rode into the twilight. The sky above him was vast and blue, empty of mercy, but full of promise. The steppe was listening. The steppe remembered his name before men dared to speak it aloud. Temujin was no longer the outcast wandering between tribes. He had become the calm in the middle of every storm. When he rode, people moved aside. When he spoke, even the wind seemed to listen. He began not with battles, but with words. He sent messengers to rival clans, not to threaten, but to invite. His message was simple: join me, or the chaos will consume you. Some laughed, some spat, but others, those who were tired of endless blood, rode to his camp. The first to come were the small clans, the weak, the forgotten, herders who had lost their herds, men without families, warriors without masters. Temujin welcomed them all. The steppe is wide enough for anyone who will keep their word, he said. And word by word his nation began to form. His army was unlike anything the plains had ever seen. He divided it not by family or tribe, but by trust. 10 men to a leader, 10 leaders to a commander, 10 commanders to a general. No warrior fought for his blood, he fought for his brothers. The bond was iron. If one man fled, the rest paid with their lives. If one man fell, the others avenged him before the sun set. The result was not just strength, it was rhythm. When his army moved, it was as if the grass itself was marching. Each rider carried everything he needed: bow, arrows, food, a spare horse. They could travel for days without rest, striking with the precision of a single heartbeat. But Temujin's genius was not only in war. He began to build something deeper, a code, a law that reached beyond the saddle. He called it the yasa. No man could steal, no warrior could abandon his post. Women were protected by right, not by pity. Messengers and traders were sacred. To harm one was death. For the first time, the steppe had rules that were not carved by violence, but by vision. Some of the old Khans called it weakness. The steppe cannot be ruled by words, they said. Temujin answered softly, "Then you have never understood their weight." He built his council carefully, choosing men not for birth, but for loyalty and skill. There was Subutai, who could read the land like a map written in wind, and Yelme, the silent warrior who followed him since boyhood. Around them gathered others, hunters, smiths, scholars taken from conquered tribes. Together, they formed something the Mongols had never known: administration. Temujin's camp grew until it was a moving city. 10,000 tents, tens of thousands of horses, a sea of smoke and firelight that rolled across the horizon. He ordered that supplies be shared. He punished greed, but rewarded bravery with spoils taken from the defeated. His judgment was sharp but consistent. Men began to believe that fairness was not a weakness, but a weapon. When his army struck, it did not simply destroy, it absorbed. The defeated were given a choice: serve or vanish. Most chose to serve. In this way, enemies became soldiers, strangers became brothers, and the Mongol horde grew larger than any single tribe could ever dream. From the ashes of betrayal rose structure. From structure, power. The next to fall were the Tatars, the tribe that had poisoned his father. Temujin surrounded them with precision, cutting off every escape. The battle was brutal, swift, final. He ordered that every adult Tatar male taller than a cartwheel be executed. It was vengeance and message at once. The old debts of blood had been paid. When it was done, he called his soldiers together and said, "Remember what the sky demands: discipline. Without it, we are no different from the dust we walk on." The steppe began to shift. Trade routes opened again. Herds grazed without fear. For the first time in generations, there were places where a traveler could sleep without posting a guard. Still, not all obeyed. Some Khans refused to kneel. Among them was Togril, the same ruler who had once called Temujin his son. Power is a restless thing. It cannot share a tent. When Togril allied himself with Jamuka and the remnants of the old tribes, the war that followed was not for land, but for the soul of the steppe itself. Temujin moved like thunder, fast, deliberate, unrelenting. He struck from the east at dawn, surrounding Togril's forces before they could mount. Jamuka fled first. Togrul fell soon after. When the dust cleared, the plains were silent. There was no one left to challenge him. At dawn, Temujin stood alone on a hill overlooking the battlefield. The wind tugged at his cloak. The horizon stretched in every direction, unbroken. He had united the steppe, not through birthright, but through vision. The tribes that had once lived by raiding now lived by rule. The chaos that had devoured generations had found its master. In the spring of 1206, he called a great council by the Onon River. Tens of thousands came, chieftains, warriors, herders, their tents gleaming white under the sun. They lifted him upon a white felt carpet, raised him toward the open sky, and gave him a name that would outlast empires. Genghis Khan, universal ruler. The wind howled through the valleys like applause. Horses reared, banners cracked. The steppe, for the first time in human memory, spoke with one voice. But even as they cheered, the man beneath the title remained silent. He was thinking not of victory, but of what must come next. The steppe was his. The world was still waiting. Once the steppe bowed to him, Genghis Khan turned his gaze beyond it. The horizon had always been his boundary, and now it became a question. What lies after the edge of the wind? The riders who had followed him from nothing watched as he drew his hand across the map of sand spread before his tent. His fingers traced mountains, rivers, names none of them could read. He said quietly, "The sky is endless. So must be our will." The first kingdom to test that will was Western Shia, a land of walled cities, canals, and stone. The Tanguts who ruled it believed no tribe could threaten them. They traded silk for horses and laughed at the stories of the steppe. Genghis Khan sent envoys first, not soldiers. They carried gifts, seals of friendship, promises of trade. The Tangut emperor dismissed them with polite arrogance. He did not understand that among the Mongols, rejection was a declaration of war. When the Mongol army came, it moved like a living storm. Tens of thousands of riders advanced without formation, yet every movement was calculated. They carried no siege engines, no ladders, only rope, fire, and patience. The Tanguts watched from their walls and waited for the wild riders to exhaust themselves. But the siege never stopped. Every night, the Mongols circled closer, cutting off rivers, setting fields ablaze, turning the land itself into a weapon. Within months, the walls cracked, the city gates burned, the Tanguts surrendered, their pride broken, but their knowledge spared. Genghis Khan did not kill their engineers or scribes. He brought them into his camp. He asked them how to build what could not be destroyed. It was the first sign of the empire to come. Conquest not only by sword, but by absorption. Every skill, every craft, every mind was fuel for something greater. From the Tanguts, the Mongols learned siege warfare. From the Chinese, they learned administration, the art of counting harvests and taxing nations. From the Turks, they learned strategy, the dance between speed and patience. Genghis Khan listened to them all. Then he rewrote everything in his own rhythm. He declared that the empire would belong to no tribe, no language, no god. Only the law, the Yasa, would rule. Even his sons would obey it or die. He reorganized his army again, creating ranks that blurred the borders of blood. A man could rise from slave to commander if he proved his worth. Loyalty replaced heritage. The steppe's old aristocracies vanished overnight. He issued decrees protecting artisans, healers, and scholars. To the traders who crossed deserts and mountains, he promised safety and justice. To those who broke their word, He promised extinction. It worked. Caravans began to flow again, carrying silks and spices between east and west. A merchant could travel 1,000 miles under the protection of the Khan's name alone. The same people who once feared the Mongols now prayed for their banners to appear. In his tent, Genghis Khan met envoys from distant kingdoms: China, Khwarezm, Persia. They brought gold, horses, and maps drawn in ink instead of blood. He studied every one of them in silence, his face unreadable. The envoys left, believing he wanted trade. In truth, he wanted understanding. He wanted to know how the world worked, its cities, its armies, its weaknesses. He gathered his generals and spoke, "The steppe is our mother, but she is small. The world beyond her is wide, and it is full of walls. Walls are meant to be tested. The next years were years of movement. The Mongol army crossed the Gobi, advanced into northern China, and faced empires that had stood 4 centuries. They fought not just with weapons, but with information. Scouts rode weeks ahead of the army, counting soldiers, measuring fields, learning languages. In every battle, the Mongols adapted. Against fortresses, they built engines from captured engineers. Against armies, they used feigned retreats, drawing enemies into traps and surrounding them with silence. The victories came one after another. The world began to realize that Genghis Khan did not fight for land. He fought to remove the idea of limits, yet he was not blind to his own mortality. In the midst of conquest, he gathered his sons and his mother, now an old woman whose eyes still burned like ice. He told them, "The empire is not mine. It belongs to the law. If you forget that, the sky will take from you what it gave to me." At night, he walked alone among the campfires. He watched his warriors sleep beside their horses, their weapons at arm's reach, their lives woven together like strands of rope. The wind carried the smell of smoke and sweat and iron. He thought of the boy who once hid in reeds with a wooden collar around his neck. The memory no longer hurt. It only reminded him how far the road of endurance could stretch. The empire kept growing. One by one, the kingdoms that had mocked the Mongols sent envoys bearing tribute. Others prepared for war. Genghis Khan accepted both with the same calm. He believed peace and war were merely 2 halves of the same breath. To the people who served him faithfully, he gave protection. To those who defied him, he gave oblivion. But even his punishments followed order. He never destroyed without reason. Each city burned to make a lesson clear enough to be remembered for generations. He once told a captured ruler, "I am the punishment of heaven. If you had not sinned greatly, heaven would not have sent me upon you." The ruler trembled. The chroniclers wrote those words down. Centuries later, they still echo. By now, the Mongol army was no longer just Mongol. Turks, Chinese, Persians, Arabs, all rode under the same banners. They spoke different tongues, but followed the same command. When they moved, the earth itself seemed to shiver. When they stopped, silence followed so deep that it felt like the pause before creation. And through it all, Genghis Khan remained unchanged. He still ate the same food as his soldiers, still slept under felt instead of silk. He still woke before dawn, drank bitter milk, and mounted his horse before the rest of the camp stirred. He ruled not by distance, but by presence. He made himself the axis of the world, and the world turned. The chroniclers of China called him a barbarian. The poets of Persia called him Destiny. The steppe called him Khan. He called himself only a servant of the sky. The more the empire grew, the more the sky demanded. The horizon that had once seemed endless now felt too small. From the forests of Siberia to the Yellow Sea, from the deserts of Gobi to the icy rivers of the north, everything already answered to the Khan. Yet still, his eyes turned west, toward the kingdoms that glittered with wealth and arrogance. Beyond the mountains lay Khwarezm, an empire of cities, markets, and pride. It was rich, educated, and self-assured. Its rulers believed the steppe could breed only savages, not strategy. They were wrong. At first, Genghis Khan sent friendship. A caravan of merchants carried silk, silver, and words of peace. But in the city of Otrar, the governor suspected spies. He seized the merchants, killed them, and confiscated their goods. When the Khan heard, he sent envoys to demand justice. The Shah of Khwarezm not only refused, he executed the envoys and sent their heads back in sacks. For 3 days, the camp of Genghis Khan was silent. The soldiers waited. The wind moved the banners. The horses stamped the ground. Then the Khan spoke. They answered with blood. Let them learn what the anger of the sky feels like. The invasion that followed was the storm the world had feared but never imagined. Across mountains and deserts the riders came, hundreds of thousands, moving with the rhythm of a single heartbeat. They rode in silence, each man carrying his food, his water, his purpose. No kingdom had ever seen an army that could travel so far, so fast, and arrive stronger than it had left. The first cities fell almost without resistance. Otrar burned first, then Bukhara, Samarkand, Nishapur. The walls that had stood for centuries crumbled within days. The Mongols fought with fire, smoke, and fear itself. They sent captives ahead of them, driving panic before the main force like wind through dry grass. They used rivers as weapons, diverted streams, drowned whole fields of wheat. Wherever they passed, the sky turned black with ash. And yet, within the destruction, there was order. Every city that surrendered was spared. Those that resisted were erased completely. It was not cruelty for its own sake, it was mathematics. Terror was faster than war. In Bukhara, when the city finally opened its gates, Genghis Khan entered the great mosque. He dismounted, climbed the pulpit, and looked down at the trembling crowd. If you had not committed great sins, he said, the sky would not have sent me as punishment upon you. No one forgot those words. Even those who survived carried them like scars. Centuries later, the ruins of their cities still whispered them to the wind. The Shah fled west into the desert, chased by silence. No one sheltered him. His allies turned away. His soldiers deserted. When he died, alone and fevered, there was no one left to bury him. The empire he had ruled with arrogance became a shadow beneath the Mongol banners. From the Caspian Sea to the Indus River, the world changed shape. Maps had to be redrawn. Merchants who once paid tribute to Persian lords now paid it to the sons of the steppe. The Silk Road, broken for generations by war and greed, was open again, patrolled by riders who called themselves servants of the Khan. Under his rule, a man could travel from the Pacific Ocean to the Mediterranean without fear of robbery. A single passport, stamped with the seal of the great Khan, was enough to pass through a dozen nations. It was said that a woman carrying gold could walk alone across Asia without being harmed. To outsiders, it seemed impossible that so much order could rise from so much ruin. But Genghis Khan saw no contradiction. He believed that destruction was not the opposite of creation, it was its beginning. Just as grass must burn before it grows green again, The world, he said, must be broken before it can be made whole. He ruled through law, not whim. His generals were forbidden to plunder without cause. He abolished ransom, forbade the killing of envoys, and executed any officer who disobeyed. He told them, "Fear me less than you fear chaos." And they did. The Mongol army moved like a living clock, its parts interchangeable, its rhythm exact. Messages traveled faster than birds. A command given at dawn in the mountains could reach the plains by nightfall. Scouts mapped every road, every well, every whisper of rebellion. For the first time, the steppe had turned into a machine. But even machines need belief to move. The men who followed him believed not in conquest, but in destiny. They believed that the blue sky itself had chosen them to bring balance to a world that had forgotten it. Their victories felt inevitable, like weather. And yet, through the endless victories, the Khan himself remained as simple as he had always been. He still ate boiled meat from a wooden bowl, still slept on felt, still rose before dawn. When his generals built him a golden throne, he refused it, saying, "The earth beneath me is gold enough." He carried no crown, no jewels. His power was his will, his law, his armor. In his rare moments of rest, he spoke little of war. He asked his scholars about the stars, about the movement of rivers, about the stories of other peoples. He wanted to know what made kingdoms rise and fall, what made men loyal or faithless. He believed knowledge was a weapon sharper than steel. The chroniclers wrote that he seemed to see the world not as it was, but as it could be, connected, obedient, whole. His dream was not endless battle, but endless order. And for a time, he almost achieved it. From Korea to the Black Sea, riders carried his commands. In the markets of Samarkand, Chinese silk hung beside Russian fur. In the mountains of Tibet, monks prayed for his soul even before he died. The world, once broken into 100 small empires, had become one body under a single mind. No one had ever ruled so much. No one ever would again. And still, he was not finished. He was growing old, though no one dared to say it aloud. His hair, once black as a raven's wing, had turned the color of dust. His hands, which had held the reins of half the world, began to ache in the cold. But his eyes still held that impossible calm, the look of a man who had measured himself against eternity and found the measure even. The empire stretched beyond imagination. It took months for a message to ride from one end to the other. And yet every distant border moved with the same rhythm. Every commander spoke the same oaths. From the Great Wall of China to the forests of the Rus, the earth obeyed one pulse, his. He spent its last years not in peace, but in motion. The sky had made him a storm, and storms do not rest. In 1226, he turned his armies once more against the Tanguts of Western Xia, the kingdom that had once bowed and then defied him again. It was the final campaign of his life. The march was brutal. Snow fell in midsummer, rivers froze, men died where they stood. But the Khan rode at the front, wrapped in wolf fur, eyes fixed on the horizon. Every mile was an act of will. When his generals begged him to turn back, he said, "The sky has not yet taken its price." The Tangut cities burned one by one. Their ruler sent envoys with gold and apologies, but it was too late. Genghis Khan accepted their surrender and ordered that the royal line be erased from history. When the last city fell, he turned his horse northward. The campaign was done. The empire was whole. But somewhere in that march, fate caught up with him. Some say he was wounded in battle, others that he fell from his horse. Whatever the cause, fever took him. The strongest man on earth could no longer mount his saddle. They built a tent apart from the army, high in the mountains where the wind was thin and clean. He lay beneath white felt. His sons and generals gathered outside. The empire waited in silence. He spoke softly to his sons. Yochi, Chagatai, Ogadei, Tolui, each a piece of his will, each a mirror of his flaws. He told them that the world was a fire that must be tended, not worshipped. He told them that the law was the spine of the empire, and that if it ever bent, the body would fall. Then he looked at the faces around him, men who had followed him from hunger to heaven, and said, "If you must fear something after I am gone, fear the day when brothers forget they are brothers." When the sun set, he asked to be left alone. The guards heard him whisper once more, "The sky is eternal, the man is but its shadow." Then he closed his eyes. They say the wind changed direction at that moment. Some say a hawk circled 3 times above the tent and vanished into the clouds. No one outside was told for days. The army moved as if he still rode among them. When they finally carried his body away, they did it in secret. 1,000 riders accompanied the funeral train. They killed everyone who saw them, shepherds, hunters, travelers. They crossed rivers, deserts, forests, until the last of them disappeared into the north. No one ever found the grave. Some say he was buried beneath a river so that the current would hide him forever. Others believe the earth opened and took him home. No stone marks his resting place. Only the steppe remembers. In the stillness of dawn, when the grass moves without wind, the herders say they hear the faint rhythm of hooves, the echo of commands shouted to invisible riders. After his death, the empire did not fall. It expanded, greater, wider, faster than before. His sons carried his banners farther than he ever dreamed, until they reached the gates of Europe and the shores of the Pacific. But the unity he had forged began to fray. The same ambition that had built his empire now began to pull it apart. Still, the name remained. It crossed languages, faiths, generations. Even his enemies centuries later spoke it with a kind of awe. For some, he was a monster. For others, a lawgiver. For the steppe, he was simply its reflection, merciless, vast, eternal. The chroniclers tried to explain him, but none could. He was not born to rule. He was carved by necessity. He built his power from hunger, his faith from survival. He turned cruelty into structure and fear into obedience. Where he passed, the world broke and then remade itself in his image. The empire he left behind became a road between worlds. Ideas, goods, and plagues moved across it like wind. The Silk Road thrived under the same banners that had once burned cities, and in that paradox lay his legacy: order through destruction, peace through fear, connection through conquest. Centuries later, when the empires that followed him had turned to dust, the people of the steppe still told his story by firelight. They said that one day, when the world forgets how to endure, he will rise again with the dawn, not as a man, but as the memory of what strength costs. Even now, when the wind moves across the plains, it carries his name, not shouted, but breathed. Genghis Khan, the child who was born holding blood in his fist, the slave who broke his collar, the wanderer who made the earth obey, the ruler who vanished into it. He was born beneath the open sky, and to the sky he returned. After the death of the Khan, the world did not end. It began again in a new shape. His laws outlived his body, carried by riders who could neither read nor forget. They rode east and west, repeating the words as prayers, and the words became a map. The empire was no longer a storm, it was a system. Caravans crossed deserts under its banners, their wheels cutting trails that would one day become the veins of continents. Every pass, every ford, every well was marked with the sign of the Khan. Those who stole were executed. Those who lied lost their tongues. Those who honored their word found protection so vast that even the deserts began to feel civilized. The Mongol army remained its spine. Each soldier carried the same bow, the same ration of dried meat, the same oath. 10 men formed a unit responsible for each other's lives. 100 units formed 1,000. The structure held like bone, unbreakable. They trained not for glory, but for endurance. Every rider had 4 horses, switching between them so that none would tire. Every arrow was counted, every wound was recorded. When they marched, the world moved with them. Dust, echoes, fear. In battle, they fought like the wind, silent until the strike. They used horns, smoke, and banners to speak across miles of chaos. If a commander fell, the next man took his place without hesitation. There was no heroism, only precision. They won not because they were cruel, but because they were impossible to stop. Yet the greatness of the empire was not only in war. For the first time, the steppe learned the art of peace. Genghis Khan had commanded that roads be built, bridges repaired, markets protected. Messengers carried orders sealed with his emblem. Small wooden tablet that opened doors in every city. It was called the paisa. To possess one was to travel without fear. At the edges of the empire, new cities rose, way stations for traders, fortresses for travelers, temples for every faith. The Khan had declared that no religion could rule another. In one campfire circle, you could find a monk, a shaman, a priest, and a scholar sharing tea. The only god that united them all was order. The empire became a corridor of exchange. Chinese paper reached Persia, Persian medicine reached China. Ideas that had once needed centuries to move now crossed the world in months. Even the stars seemed closer as astronomers from every land gathered to draw the same heavens on different maps. But peace was never without its price. The taxes grew heavy, the discipline harsher. Those who once rejoiced in unity began to dream again of freedom, and yet the memory of chaos kept them silent. Fear in the Mongol world was not a flaw, it was the foundation. Among the soldiers, stories of the Khan still spread. They said that at night his spirit rode through the camps, counting the fires, watching who slept and who stood guard. They said that the wind that howled through the passes was his breath, reminding them to stay awake. Whether they believed it or not did not matter. They acted as if it were true. Even centuries later, when the empire began to fracture, the pattern he had carved remained. Every Khan who ruled after him imitated his simplicity, eating from wooden bowls, sleeping in felt tents, pretending they were still men of the steppe. None truly were. The world he had forged was already too large for its riders to see its edges. The Yasa, his law, continued to govern trade, crime, and diplomacy long after his lineage faded. It forbade blood feuds, protected the weak, and demanded that every man know his place. The punishment for breaking it was swift and absolute. Even princes could be executed if they disobeyed. There was logic beneath the cruelty. The Khan had believed that mercy to one lawbreaker was cruelty to all others. To him, fairness was not kindness, but symmetry, a balance between what was taken and what was deserved. and so his justice endured, not out of love, but out of habit. The empire's messengers became legends. They rode day and night, changing horses at every station, crossing entire continents without stopping. They carried commands, gold, and sometimes only silence. They were faster than rumor, more certain than kings. In distant lands, people spoke of them as if they were not men but omens. When the dust rose on the horizon, cities closed their gates, priests lit incense, and rulers prayed that the riders were only passing through. In the heart of the empire, the great capital took shape, Karakoram. It was not a city of marble or temples, but of motion and sound. Blacksmiths worked beside scholars. Markets thrummed with every language of the known world. From its center, lines of riders spread outward like rays from the sun. To live there was to feel the pulse of the planet itself. To serve, there was to belong to something vast, almost divine. People who had once been enemies now shared bread under the same law. It was a fragile yes, but for a brief moment, the world truly seemed one. At night, when the fires dimmed and the wind quieted, old men told their children that the eternal blue sky still watched over them, not as a god of mercy, but as a witness. They said that Genghis Khan had not died at all. He had only become part of that sky, the unblinking eye above the plains. And when lightning flashed across the horizon, they said it was his approval or his warning. The empire that bore his name would splinter, but its logic would remain. Borders would rise, faiths would clash, empires would fall, yet the rhythm of connection he had set in motion would never stop. Every road that crossed Asia, every trade that linked oceans, every law that demanded accountability, all of them carried a trace of the Khan's shadow. He had not built monuments of stone. He had built movement. He had given the world a way to move together, even when divided. And that, in the end, was his greatest conquest. After the Khan's death, his sons divided the empire not by hate, but by necessity. It was too vast for one hand to hold. They drew invisible lines across deserts and mountains, though the sky above them was still the same. Each son took a piece of the horizon and called it his duty. But power, once divided, learns to envy itself. At first, they kept the rhythm their father had taught: discipline, silence, law. The couriers still rode, the markets still sang. But then came the arguments over inheritance, over which line of blood was purest, over which voice could claim the will of heaven. Brothers became rivals, rivals became strangers. The empire began to hum with the sound of distance. In China, his descendants built palaces of stone. In Persia, they turned nomads into kings. In the West, they reached Europe and saw towers taller than dunes. Everywhere, the children of the steppe learned the weight of walls. They ruled the world, yet became prisoners of its comfort. Still, the idea their father had forged refused to die. Even when his grandsons fought each other, they followed the same patterns: swift justice, open roads, a hunger for order stronger than greed. They spoke different tongues, prayed to different gods, but when they gave an order, they used the same word: yasa. For generations, people who never saw his face still lived under his shadow. From the Volga to the Pacific, travelers carried silver coins stamped with his name. When they spoke of him, they no longer spoke of a man, but of an age, the time of the Mongols, a time when the world itself seemed to breathe in unison. Historians would later call it terror. Poets would call it destiny. But those who lived it called it balance. For a moment, no border was impassable, no faith forbidden, no trade impossible. The roads built for war became veins of peace. The same horsemen who had burned cities now protected them. Even in lands that hated him, his order took root. Russia learned unity from its conquerors. China learned speed from its invaders. Persia rebuilt its science with tools stolen and then shared. Every culture he touched absorbed part of his rhythm, the sense that chaos could be tamed, that the world could be one if someone dared to pay the cost. But the cost never disappears. It only moves. The blood that built the empire soaked deep into the soil. And when new rulers walked that earth, the echoes of his conquests still whispered beneath their feet. They reminded them what happens when ambition finds discipline. And when discipline forgets, mercy. Centuries passed. The Khan's bloodline faded, scattered into history. Nomads turned to farmers, tents to houses, legends to songs. But in the steppe, the wind remained the same. It carried the same scent of grass and smoke, the same cold breath at dawn. And sometimes, when the thunder rolled across the horizon, old men smiled and said, "He is riding again." To understand him was to understand contradiction. He was both destroyer and builder, both tyrant and reformer. He brought silence through fire, unity through fear. He killed millions to give billions a common road. The world he left was wounded, but connected. It would heal in ways he could never imagine. When the Silk Road flourished under his heirs, it became more than a trade route. It was the spine of civilization. Gold from Europe, porcelain from China, medicine from Arabia, ideas from India, all met in the dust of markets his riders had once trampled. Where once he had sent death, now came conversation. The empire he carved by sword had become a bridge held together by memory. The scholars of later ages tried to measure his legacy in numbers. Battles fought, cities burned, miles conquered. But such arithmetic cannot measure change. He did not merely extend borders. He erased the idea that they mattered. He taught the world that control was possible, that the sky's law could replace man's greed. Even centuries later, leaders, soldiers, and dreamers still invoked his name, some in admiration, others in warning. To some, he was proof that will could bend fate. To others, a reminder that order bought with blood must one day be repaid. In the endless grass of Mongolia, the herders still pour milk into the ground before they drink. They whisper to the wind, thanking the sky and the spirits of their ancestors. They do not call him a god. They call him a presence. At night, the steppe looks the same as it did in his time. Black earth, silver moon, the sound of horses breathing, the stars spread wide and merciless, the same ones he used to navigate before compasses existed. Somewhere among them, the people say, his soul still rides, guarding the balance he once fought to create. He became what all rulers seek and none achieve, inevitability, a force that neither time nor distance could diminish. His story is not the tale of a man, but of a principle that can make order out of chaos, and that the cost of peace is always written in flame. In the end, his greatest monument was not the empire itself. It was the idea that no empire lasts, that every kingdom, every ruler, every city must return to the dust it came from. He understood that more clearly than any of his enemies. That is why he built nothing that could crumble. The empire fell, the cities changed names, the banners rotted. But the pattern remained, structure born of hunger, law born of loss, power born of purpose. Every age that followed would echo his rhythm in its own way, In every revolution, every government, every dream of unity, he had set the template. The rest of humanity simply kept tracing it. And so, even now, when history looks back across the centuries, it finds him waiting, not as a ghost, but as a question. How much are we willing to destroy to create something that lasts? And when we build order from chaos, do we build it for others or only for ourselves? The wind does not answer. It only carries his name, rolling over the grass like a quiet drumbeat that never stops. Genghis Khan. Centuries passed, and the empire turned to dust. The cities he built were buried under new names. The roads he opened became borders again. The languages that once shared his law forgot its words, but not its rhythm. The wind still moved in the same direction, as if remembering the paths his riders had carved. Historians tried to weigh his legacy like gold, to count the dead, the cities, the miles. They wrote of conquest and cruelty, of blood and brilliance, but each time they thought they had captured him, he slipped through their hands. For how do you measure a man who became geography? His name never disappeared. It crossed centuries the way his armies once crossed mountains, slowly, inevitably. In Asia, it remained sacred. In Europe, it became a warning. In the West, it became a myth. Travelers told stories of a Khan who ruled the edge of the world, who commanded the wind itself, who vanished into the sky without a grave. Painters drew him as a god. Poets cursed him as a monster. Every culture reshaped him in its own reflection. In some, he was the hero who united mankind. In others, the destroyer who proved that unity costs too much. But myths do not care for truth. They survive because they fill the spaces history leaves blank. And his life had left more blank space than any other. When the empires of his descendants crumbled, the memory of his law outlived them. Across centuries of silence, the idea of order through will remained. Every ruler who dreamed of dominion invoked his ghost, whether in secret admiration or public fear. Kings quoted him. Revolutionaries cursed him, but they all spoke his name. In Mongolia, the land that bore him, his legend went underground. For generations, foreign powers ruled the plains, but the herders still whispered prayers to the eternal blue sky. They poured milk on the ground before drinking, calling upon the spirit of the Khan who had never truly left. His name was banned, then rediscovered, then reborn, not as a warning, but as pride. In the 20th century, when nations began to rewrite their identities, Mongolia raised his image again. Statues of steel and bronze rose from the grass. Faces of stone turned toward the horizon. Airports, schools, and children carried his name. He became not a conqueror, but a father, the symbol of a people who had once ruled the world and survived its loss. Tourists came to see him. Scholars debated him. Filmmakers remade him. Every age built its own Genghis Khan, a mirror for its fears and its faith. To the modern world, he became a paradox too large to judge. The destroyer who opened the first global age. The barbarian who created the world's safest roads. The illiterate nomad who invented the logic of empire. When satellites began to circle the earth, their paths followed the same latitudes his riders once crossed. When the internet connected continents, historians called it the New Silk Road. And somewhere, perhaps, the steppe laughed, because he had already imagined it, a world linked by speed, by communication, by law strong enough to outlast kings. He had built it with horses and arrows. We rebuilt it with wires and light. But the pattern was the same. We move faster but not wiser. We connect but still divide. We build walls, then wonder who will come to tear them down. If the Khan could see this world, cities made of glass, skies filled with metal, he might only nod and say, "So, the steppe has learned to stand still." His story continues not in bloodlines, but in systems, in every bureaucracy that values order over mercy, in every nation that seeks unity through control, in every leader who believes that peace can be engineered. The world he dreamed of still breathes, wearing different names, and yet his truest monument remains the steppe itself. The same grass still bends under the same sky. The same wind still sings across the same endless distances. Children still learn to ride before they can walk. When they look to the horizon, they see not history, but possibility. On certain mornings, when fog lies low over the Onon River, it is said the water reflects more than the sky. Sometimes, for a moment, the outline of a rider appears in the mist, tall, still, waiting. Then the sun burns through, and he is gone. The Mongols say that when you ride fast enough, the past rides with you. Maybe that is why the legend endures. It moves too quickly to die. In the silence between continents, his name is still spoken, not in fear, not in worship, but in recognition. That somewhere inside every human heart lies the same hunger that once drove him, the hunger to bring meaning to the chaos, to shape the world with our own hands, to test how far the horizon can go. And that is why, even now, 8 centuries after his death, Genghis Khan has never truly become the past. He remains a direction, a reminder that order and destruction are born from the same need to impose will upon the wind. The camera pulls back. The steppe fills the frame, endless, silver, breathing. The wind moves across the grass like memory. Somewhere far away, thunder rolls low and distant like hooves, and a voice, calm, certain, ancient, whispers, "The sky is eternal. The man is its shadow." Then the screen fades to blue, the same blue that has watched over everything since the beginning. The steppe is quiet now. No banners, no drums, no thunder of hooves, only the sound of wind across grass, moving as it did 1,000 years ago. The world has changed beyond anything the Khan could imagine, yet the rhythm beneath it remains the same. In the hush before dawn, the earth still exhales mist through the hollows of the plains. The air tastes of iron and salt. A rider could appear at any moment, cresting a distant ridge, and the scene would not betray its century. The light would strike his armor, the breath of his horse would turn white in the cold, and the horizon would swallow him just as it did all those who came before. History is not a line. It is a circle written in dust. Empires rise, stretch, and crumble, and the wind writes their names away. But some names cling to the silence, refusing to fade. His is one of them, Genghis Khan, a man who taught the world that will can shape reality, that discipline can bind chaos, that even the smallest life can carry the weight of eternity if it refuses to kneel. The steppe forged him, tested him, broke him, and in the breaking made him whole. He became not a ruler, but a mirror, showing mankind what it becomes when survival turns to purpose. His story was never truly about conquest. It was about control over self, over fear, over the unending hunger to be remembered. And perhaps that is why the world still repeats it, because every generation faces its own wilderness, its own horizon, and wonders how far courage can reach before it breaks. Modern history measures him by destruction, by numbers carved into chronicles written centuries later. But the herders of the steppe, remember something else. They remember the laws that kept trade alive, the messengers who crossed mountains without fear, the strange, brief harmony that followed the storm. They say that for a heartbeat of time, under the Khan's shadow, the world moved as one. In the ruins of Samarkand, tourists stand where his soldiers once marched. They take photographs beneath domes rebuilt from ashes, and the guides recite his name with equal parts awe and apology. In Beijing, his portrait hangs in museums, his face flattened into ink and captioned as conqueror. In Mongolia, his statue rises higher than any church steeple, a rider of stainless steel pointing toward the sunrise. Airports, vodkas, currencies, even computer viruses bear his name. He has become a language of power itself, invoked, repeated, misunderstood, but never forgotten. If you listen closely, you can still hear the cadence of his world and ours, in the algorithms that map the planet, in the markets that never sleep, in the armies that move by satellite instead of stars. Different tools, same hunger, the will to order, the dream of unity, the cost paid in silence. Somewhere, perhaps, he would recognize it. He might look at our roads and data lines and say, "So, the riders have learned to move without horses." He would understand the speed, the precision, the obedience. But he might ask what we have forgotten: the discipline of purpose, the law that bound power to consequence, the humility before the sky. Because even he, the master of half the earth, bowed to something greater. Every victory he claimed, he credited to the eternal blue. He believed that a man could rule only as long as he served, that to defy the sky was to lose everything. It was not faith in a god, it was faith in balance. And balance is what the world keeps losing. In the vast emptiness where his empire once stood, satellites now pass overhead like silver ghosts. At night, their lights cross paths where his camps once burned. The grass below waves in the same rhythm it always did, and for an instant, the ancient and the modern breathe together. The planet remembers even what people forget. Maybe that is all legacy truly is, the memory the earth keeps when names fade from books. Not the monuments, not the victories, not even the blood, but the echo that lingers in the elements. The way water still follows the roots carved by long-dead riders. The way wind still hums the same low note over their graves. In that sense, he never left. Every gust that sweeps across Mongolia is a page turning, every rumble of thunder a drumbeat from a war long ended. His empire collapsed, his descendants scattered, but the pattern he wrote into the world still loops through every age: order, expansion, division, renewal. Perhaps this is the secret he took with him, that history itself moves like the steppe wind, forward, but never away. It circles, gathers, and returns, carrying the scent of what it once destroyed. We call it progress. He would have called it destiny. So the story ends where it began: a horizon, a rider, a sky that refuses to end. If you stand alone in the plains of Mongolia and close your eyes, you can hear it: the soft hum of grass against grass, the breath of horses long gone, the echo of a name that was once spoken as command and now survives as whisper. It is not history, it is continuity. The screen fades to twilight. A single line appears against the blue. The sky is eternal. The man is its shadow. And for a moment, nothing moves. Then the wind begins again.